Welcome. In this video, we will discuss how principles of instructional design can be used when developing online learning activities. We will also discuss models of instructional design, which are like a roadmap or guide that you can use during the planning process. Let's get started with some tips first.
You might have some experience with blended or online instruction. You might be brand new to this learning platform. Regardless, there are a few simple things to keep in mind. First, focus on what is most important. For many, this is probably your content. For others, providing structure for your students might be most important. Regardless, keep what is most important at the forefront. If possible, establish a routine for when content is released and when it is due. Second, keep all activities short. You can chunk material into small bits to cover what is necessary over several days. A good rule of thumb for the amount of seat time students spend should be 30 minutes or less, and that is dependent upon the student's age. Elementary children should complete activities that take less than 30 minutes. However, it may be more appropriate for high school students to spend more time engaged in an activity. And finally, be prepared. You might find that it takes you longer to teach online than it does to teach face-to-face. In an online environment, you must anticipate everything your students need. Therefore, video tutorials are your friend. If you have directions to share or new content to teach, make a video tutorial using a free screencasting program. Your kids will love to hear your voice too.
Instructional design is a process of refining instruction to improve student learning. It's helpful to first take a look at the needs of your students. What skills, abilities, and interests do your students have? How do you currently plan for student learning? How can you leverage students' skills, abilities, and interests to improve your planning? Using the instructional design process to guide your planning will help you chart the best path forward to meet student needs. The instructional design process can serve as a toolkit to aid in your transition to online learning. The first benefit of using instructional design techniques is improved organization. Many instructional design models, including Assure, which is our focus for this presentation, promote planning via a series of logical steps. These steps are easy to follow and can be used in a virtual environment. The next benefit of using instructional design techniques involves tailoring the instruction to learner needs. Most instructional design processes begin with analyzing the needs of the learner. A deeper understanding of learner needs allows us to better plan to meet those needs. A careful analysis of learner needs facilitates selection of online activities to target those needs. Instructional design techniques provide practical planning benefits as well. Many models assist in physically writing lesson plans for students, helping the instructor stay focused. Instructional design techniques help maintain both alignment and focus in lessons. The standards, objectives, and activities should all be aligned, working together for the same student outcomes. Alignment is especially important for online instruction. The huge volume of information present online means choices must be made to maintain focus and avoid straying from the topic at hand. Finally, instructional design processes allow instructors to evaluate the success of their efforts by helping to plan assessment activities. These could be formal or informal assessments. Formal assessments could include tests or quizzes, which can also be administered online. Informal writing assignments and online discussions may also be leveraged as part of this process.
The Assure model is an instructional system design model. It leverages principles set forth by Robert Gagne in his Events of Instruction, so you may notice some similarities. The Assure model directly incorporates the use of technology and media into the learning process. So let's take a look at how this process works. ASSURE is actually an acronym for the 6 steps of the model.
The first of the 6 stages or steps is analyze. In order to plan effectively, it is necessary to analyze the needs of the learner group. Gathering information about the learners will allow you to plan to meet their unique needs. So let's talk about what analysis looks like in the classroom. Whenever we analyze, we identify the needs or abilities of our students. So for example, we may ask ourselves, what ability ranges exist among our students? What are their learning needs? Maybe preferences for visual, auditory, or kinesthetic learning. But one thing that is really important to note is that when we say analyze, we may be thinking about a formal method to conduct an analysis. However, although you might use an interest inventory or diagnostic assessment data, the needs and abilities named earlier may be things that you're already aware of because you know your students. Just remember what was stated earlier with our tip number 1, what is most important. Through analysis, you'll also decide what is most critical for students. The next step of the model is to state your standards and objectives. In this phase, what learners should know and be able to do at the end of the instructional segment is clearly articulated. As an educator, you'll clearly articulate your standards and objectives so that everyone involved is clear about those desired outcomes. One example of how you might approach this step is by unpacking your standards. Remember what we mentioned earlier about what students should know and be able to do? What our students should know comes from the content in our standards. That's our what. What students should do is the skill. That is the verb in the standards. So in my experience, I would take my standards and I would separate the what from the verb to focus on those 2 things when developing the learning objectives. All at the same time, I'm assuring that I have alignment between standards and objectives.
Step 3 is to select appropriate strategies, technology, media, and materials. Now that you know the needs of your learners and what you want them to accomplish, it is time to select the strategies, technology, and other tools to get them here. So choosing the strategies and technology will depend on your learners and their specific needs. So remember that analysis that we discussed earlier. What strengths did your students have? What about your standards and objectives? What skills do you need to emphasize? In this stage, you're going to determine what materials are needed to address those needs. So some tips in choosing the right technology might include tools, applications, or sites you and your students are already familiar with. Really think about when it's best to learn a new tool. Is it right now? Or if so, if it is now, you'll know the answer from your analysis. And the point here is to ensure your approach and your purpose is targeted to meet the specific goal you developed earlier.
U stands for utilize the technology, media, and materials. After selecting the technology, media, and materials, it is time to make a detailed plan for implementation in order to use them effectively. In this step of the model, as an educator, you will be considering how students will use the materials you selected in the previous steps. In what ways will students access the materials? Are there specific websites, devices, programs, applications, or whatever that students might use? And here's something else. Will students know how to use them? Will students complete group work, or perhaps each take a particular role within the material selected? All of those things need to be considered in this step because your goal is still what students should know and be able to do. In this step, you must carefully plan how students will use their resources so the focus is on the content that is learned.
Effective planning is very important for instructional success. The next step in the ASSURE model is R, which represents required learner participation. The learner is not a passive recipient of instruction, but an active participant in the learning process. It is important to consider how you will engage learners throughout the lesson. There's lots of different ways to ensure students are engaged in the learning process, but one example might be the roles students are using. Suppose you've chosen a research activity, and normally you would have students work in pairs. With the changes to the environment, working in pairs is probably not going to work, and researching everything independently may be too much work. So, what if that was adjusted so students are not all researching the exact same thing? Perhaps the students are researching from different perspectives. So, for example, say their research is focused on water conservation. We may have some students researching from the perspective of a farmer. Some maybe would be researching from the perspective of an environmentalist. Then, the students can share those perspectives using a platform of the teacher's choice. All the information together will be used to develop a particular solution or product. And that's how we make sure there's engagement according to the role. But also, it really strengthens the understanding of the students and also integrates additional perspectives into the learning activity.
The final stage is evaluate and revise. It is critical for educators to evaluate the effectiveness of instruction and plan improvements for the future. There are multiple types of information educators can use to evaluate instruction. The most obvious evaluation will be an analysis of students' performance. Then, we determine how effective the instruction was based on that performance. Did our students have the appropriate access? Other methods might even be engagement. How engaged were your students in this lesson? Were they really engaged with the content? Student understanding of the content is always at the core. And in order to evaluate the effectiveness of my instruction, I have to answer that hard question. Did students really learn this? And the other thing is, how do I know the students learned it? We know this is a stressful time. We want you to leave with a quote that may be uplifting to you. We hope this finds you happy, relaxed, and healthy.